President of the Government, President of the Congress of Deputies, President of the Senate, President of the Constitutional Court, President of the Supreme Court, of the General Council of the Judiciary, members of the Congress of Deputies and the Senate, ladies and gentlemen. I thank the Madam President for her kind words, as well as the invitation that the Apostolic See has received on the occasion of my trip to this country, as well as the courtesy of welcoming me to this historic palace of the Congress of Deputies, an eminent setting for the institutional, legal, and democratic life of the Kingdom of Spain. I come before you all as Bishop of Rome and pastor of the Catholic Church, aware that the mission entrusted to the successor of the Apostle Peter as the principle and foundation of unity for bishops and the faithful places the Holy See in a unique dialogue with peoples and states. My presence among you is intended as a gesture of closeness to Spain, within the framework of mutual cooperation and a word offered in service to the human person. The Church walks with humanity, shares its hopes and its wounds, listens to the questions of every age, and allows itself to be challenged by everything that concerns the existence of the men and women of today. Therefore, when it addresses public life, it does so while respecting the specific mission of institutions and the legitimate responsibility of those who have received the mandate to legislate. It recognizes the autonomy of earthly realities and the distinction between the ecclesial community and the political community. And precisely from that awareness, it offers a reflection born of the desire to serve the common good and to recall what makes living together truly human. In this chamber, social coexistence is given legal form. Here, differences are heard, organized, and, when possible, turned into shared decisions. Therefore, beyond the legitimate diversity of positions, every legislative task ends up facing a decisive question. What conception of the human person inspires the laws, and what kind of society do those laws build? Faced with this question, Spain possesses a particularly rich memory. Its geographical and political identity has been interwoven with a history in which faith and reason, art and law, tradition and thought have been able to meet fruitfully. In its cathedrals and universities, in its immortal literature, in its legal institutions, and in the very spirit of its people, there remains a living heritage that has shaped a way of experiencing freedom and organized the common good. From the universal pages of Don Quixote, where Cervantes proclaimed that freedom is one of the most precious gifts that the heavens have given to men, and from the great Spanish legal tradition to the metaphysical concerns of Unamuno, who recalled that man does not resign himself to dying completely, Spain has known how to view the human being as something more than a piece of the social, economic, and political order. It has recognized him as a creature open to the truth, endowed with freedom, and moved by a thirst for eternity that no temporal reality can extinguish. In a word, as someone whose dignity precedes all utility and to whose service legislative action is subject. That is why, when speaking of the human person today, this memory naturally leads to Salamanca and the thought that matured there. The symbolic presence in this hall of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella refers to that moment when Spain was faced with historical responsibilities of universal scope. A few years later, Salamanca would assume with singular clarity the moral and legal reflection that this scenario demanded. In that university seat, 500 years ago, when new worlds and immense possibilities were opening up in relations between peoples, some masters understood that reason could not be invoked to cloak in legitimacy whatever force or interest presented as convenient. They thus introduced into historical discernment the question of the irreducible value of every human being and the moral limits of power. We must recognize, we must acknowledge that society and the Church itself were not always up to the intuitions that found an echo in their own Christian tradition. However, that question opened an intellectual and moral horizon that went beyond its own historical moment. The intuition of the totus orbis, of a human community broader than any particular power, allowed for the affirmation of the existence of legal and moral ties between peoples. From Spain, the reflection of the school of Salamanca and, in particular, Friar Francisco de Vitoria, along with other Dominican Jesuits, help shape a legal and moral conscience, capable of remembering that authority always carries a responsibility with it, and that every human being must be recognized as a subject of rights and duties. That longing still speaks to us today, that dignity, justice, and the common good be the measure of social relations, both at a national and an international level. This is one of the great legacies of Spain, having united historical action with the clarity of moral reason. That contribution, born on the banks of the Tormes, transcended classrooms and libraries, and came to be part of a broader consciousness, shared by the international community, which continues to ask how to build peace based on the recognition of the person and not on the imposition of force. That legacy also lives on in these Houses of Parliament. Every time the legislator asks how to make what is possible just, how to make what is legal truly human, and how the will of the majority can safeguard those goods that belong to everyone and respect what no majority can legitimately violate. The Salamancan question continues to accompany the work of those who serve in public life. Today, the new worlds opening up before us are no longer drawn on maps. They unfold in technology, in the economy, in biomedicine, and in the digital universe, where human power reaches increasingly delicate areas of personal and social life. Progress offers admirable possibilities, and today we see this in a unique way in the development of artificial intelligence and new technologies. As I recalled in my recent encyclical, technology itself is not neutral because it takes on the face of those who conceive, finance, regulate, and use it. That is why, in the face of the transformations of our time, our discernment must focus on the place the human person occupies in our decisions and how the dignity of work, solidarity, social policy, and the common good are being addressed in a new way today. This discernment begins with a primary affirmation. every authentically just society is built upon the recognition of the inviolable dignity of the human person. Such dignity precedes any state concession and cannot be subordinated to shifting social consensus or the whims of the majorities of the moment. It belongs to every human being by the very fact of existing, and therefore it must guide every positive legal system. Christian faith proclaims it based on revelation. Human reason can recognize it as a requirement inscribed in the truth of man. When this conviction remains alive, the law becomes a protection for all and a guarantee against the imposition of private interests and agendas. On this foundation, it is my duty today to speak a calm and firm word to those who bear the grave responsibility of legally ordering social coexistence. This coexistence can be threatened by the throwaway culture, as Pope Francis has warned so many times. In this sense, if life ceases to be recognized as a fundamental value, what future can our societies have? Can a community truly be called just if it leaves in the shadows the unborn child, the elderly, the sick, those who suffer in silence, or those who depend entirely on the care of others? The defense of human life is not a partial issue or a sectarian interest. It is a goal of civilization. Every human life must be recognized and protected from its conception until its natural end, in every circumstance of its existence. When this certainty is obscured, the most vulnerable are the first victims, and the law loses its deepest meaning, to serve and protect every person. Therefore, the moral greatness of a nation is shown above all in its ability to accompany, protect, and love those lives experiencing the greatest fragility. The common good is, in a way, the social form of human dignity. It does not consist of the mere sum of particular interests, but of the set of social life conditions that make it possible for associations and each of their members to achieve their own perfection more fully and easily. When the common good ceases to be a shared horizon, public action risks fragmenting into partial interests, unable to safeguard what belongs to everyone. In this context, the family is of particular importance as the primary human reality and natural foundation of the community. In the home, generations intertwine, and a living memory is passed on, giving society its inner continuity. Wherever the family is supported, the spiritual and social stability of nations is also strengthened. The family will always be the first school of humanity where one learns, before anywhere else, the basic grammar of coexistence, receiving life, caring for others, forgiving, serving, and belonging. Educational institutions also play a decisive role in this task. In them, new generations can learn to seek and love the truth and to question themselves about the meaning of life and the dignity of every person. That is why many parents, eager for their children to learn how to relate, think critically, and acquire solid values, place great hope in them as valuable allies in their education. This collaboration must always respect the primary and inalienable right of parents to choose the type of education and training their children receive, in accordance with their own moral, cultural and religious convictions. The affirmation of human dignity cannot remain abstract when so many people are forced to leave everything behind to seek peace, security, and the future. The tragic migratory drama also challenges the conscience of nations and the ethical foundation of the international order today. Numerous men, women, and children are forced, by often dramatic circumstances, to leave their communities and abandon loved ones, histories, and ties. This reality goes beyond any purely demographic or economic reading. It constitutes an eminently moral and legal issue. Wherever a person is discriminated against for their national, ethnic, religious, or linguistic origin, or for their economic and social status, the universal principle of the equal dignity of all human beings is gravely violated. The situation of migrants and refugees demands a response that looks at people, addresses the causes that force them to leave, and goes beyond mere flow management. From this arises a dual demand for social justice: to offer safe and legal pathways, a respectful welcome, and real possibilities for integration, and at the same time promote the right to remain in one's own land, working so that no one has to leave their home due to a lack of peace, security, or dignified living conditions, or because of economic inequalities and the effects of the climate crisis. In recent years, increasingly dangerous routes have highlighted the very high cost of this reality, so often hidden or ignored. Many people continue to fall prey to traffickers and smugglers who take advantage of their desperation. It is necessary to strengthen prevention, rescue, and assistance for victims, especially within the framework of regional and multilateral cooperation. No nation can face a challenge of this magnitude alone. Therefore, a coordinated, supportive, and effective response is essential, capable of guaranteeing protection, shelter, and real opportunities for integration to those who emigrate. When the institutional response becomes accessible, fair, and coordinated, borders cease to be places of abandonment and can become spaces for the responsible protection of human dignity. Honorable members, the world is going through a deep spiritual and cultural crisis that manifests itself in multiple forms of violence, polarization, and mutual distrust. In this context, peace is presented as a political aspiration, and even more, as a true moral requirement. It calls for public discourse that respects those who think differently, institutions placed at the service of encounter, a historical memory that seeks truth and reconciliation, and a social life capable of sustaining civic friendship and mutual respect amidst disagreement. Internationally, peace requires diplomatic courage, ethical responsibility, and a vision for the future based on respect for each nation's identity and the obligation of states to resolve their disputes through the peaceful means offered by international law. Every war constitutes, in the final analysis, a painful defeat of the capacity to negotiate and also of that common conscience of humanity that recognizes bonds of justice between nations. Weapons may impose a temporary silence, but they can never build an authentic and lasting peace. That is why it is worrying that in various parts of the world, and also in Europe, rearmament is once again being presented as an almost inevitable response to the fragility of the international scene. True security, on the other hand, is born from justice, patient dialogue, respect for international law, and a policy capable of putting the lives of peoples above the interests that profit from war. The development of new technologies and artificial intelligence in the military sphere also demands rigorous ethical oversight, so that decisions regarding life and death are never offloaded to automated systems nor removed from the moral responsibility of the human person. The international community is called to rediscover the indispensable value of dialogue as a patient path toward fair and lasting agreements, founded on respect for treaties, on the transparency of diplomatic action, and on the sincere will to prioritize peace over the use of force. From there, trust and hope are born. As the European Union motto, In Varietate Concordia, reminds us, true unity does not mean uniformity, but rather cohesion in diversity, making cultures, sensibilities, and traditions an opportunity for mutual enrichment. Likewise, within our own societies, it is urgent to build a culture of reciprocity. Political plurality should not degenerate into the permanent disqualification of the adversary. In a mature society, even conflict can become a path to peace when differences are softened by listening and are directed toward recognizing the needs, desires, and capabilities of all. But peace is not just a political or institutional reality. It is also born in the conscience, where resentment, indifference, and hatred give way to reconciliation. That is why it is established and protected through language as well. Words can open paths or close them. They can illuminate reality or distort it until encounter becomes impossible. Those who hold public responsibility have, therefore, a special obligation to guard their words to disarm language. Firmness does not require contempt. Disagreement does not entail humiliation. From this respect for others also comes the duty to safeguard the space where their convictions, their conscience, and their relationship with God mature. Attention to that inner realm allows for a better understanding of a decisive issue for any truly democratic society: freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, a fundamental right that protects the most intimate sphere of individuals. The freedom upon which the contemporary state is built, if it is authentic, recognizes the religious dimension of the human being, respects it, and protects it legally, and prevents anyone from having to renounce contributing to the society in which they live because of their faith. Without confusing the legal and moral spheres, it is also worth remembering that freedom requires a full understanding of itself. Being free does not only mean being free from coercion or having many choices available. It means being able to recognize the good and responsibly adhere to it. Therefore, every truly free society also requires a fair limitation of public power, so that the freedom of individuals, communities, and associations is not unduly restricted. From this perspective, the legitimate autonomy of the temporal order must never be interpreted as hostility toward the religious phenomenon. Faith does not seek to impose itself through privileges or coercion. However, it cannot be relegated to silence either, as if it were irrelevant to public life. In this context, the sacramental seal of confession holds special importance for the Catholic Church. It is part of the broader scope of religious freedom, which guarantees believing communities their own space for life, organization, and internal discipline. Protecting it legally, as is done analogously in some professions, means preserving a sacred space of inner freedom where the believer can open their soul before God without fear of external pressure, as international standards also recognize. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to pause for a moment on some images that adorn this chamber. In this session hall, natural light enters through the skylight that crowns the room. That light coming from above can remind us that politics also needs to recognize a measure that precedes and transcends it. The paintings that evoke the reception of the gospel and the Decalogue at the top of the main wall also recall something essential. Without confusing the political order with the religious, these signs invite us to recognize that modern freedom has also been prepared by a long education of conscience, deeply marked by the Christian tradition. In that inner school, peoples learn that the law must serve the good, that justice places limits on force, that power requires legitimacy, that the poor fully belong to the community, that the stranger must be welcomed according to their dignity, and that human life can never be treated as a commodity. A law does not reach its true greatness merely by having been formally approved. It reaches it when, besides being valid in form, it can stand before the dignity of the person and emerge from that examination without shame. I invite you, then, to lift your gaze, not to turn away from reality, but to remember that every decision by public authorities affects flesh and blood people, especially those with the least power to make themselves heard. Because having a broader vision means looking more deeply at what is at stake in every public decision. That is why, along with technical responses and legal reforms, a moral renewal is also needed. Spain can offer much along this path. It has a language that unites continents, a cultural, legal, and spiritual tradition that has known how to bring faith and reason, law and conscience, unity and plurality into dialogue. That historical experience also recalls the value of harmony and the patient effort to build a peaceful and just coexistence. May this noble nation never lose the memory of its roots, nor the boldness to look to the future. May Spain continue to be a land of encounter, of culture, of solidarity and of hope, and may its public life always know how to unite the firmness of convictions with the nobility of dialogue and the greatness of service. May God grant peace to all the nations of the earth, harmony to families, and serenity to consciences. And may days of prosperity, justice, and lasting peace descend upon the kingdom of Spain, marked by the apostolic footprint of Saint James and the maternal presence of the Virgin of the Pillar. Thank you very much.